It's such an extraordinary place. When you arrive, you're met by this beautiful winged scarab up in the top of the lintel upon the entrance. And here's the walkway going into Dendera. It was a temple built around 300 BC, dedicated to the goddess Hathor, the goddess of love and joy. So this is Hathor's temple of love and joy. The Ptolemies who built it are an extraordinary group of enlightenment seekers. The year is 330 BC. Alexander the Great has conquered most of the world, the known world to him, certainly at that time. He was a great initiate, studied in Babylon, became a pharaoh in Egypt, went on to conquer Asia. He died at 33 in Babylon, and after his death, his empire was divided among his generals. The Ptolemaic generals were the ones that inherited this part of Egypt. Now, Alexander the Great, of course, was Macedonian, and so were his generals, both the Ptolemies and their rivals, the Seleucids. And when the Ptolemies came to Egypt, they first came to Alexandria, where they built the incredible library of Alexandria, as well as the lighthouse at Alexandria, naming the city, of course, after Alexander. Alexandria became an absolute focal point for enlightenment seekers, a crossroads, if you will, where in the next couple hundred years you had initiates coming from India, from Iran, from Iraq, and certainly from Egypt, all coming into this area and swapping scholarship. The Ptolemaic kings, pharaohs, embarked on a mission to rebuild ancient Egypt. And one of their jewels, one of their gems, among many, was this temple, the Temple of Hathor at Dendera. It's in beautiful condition today, but we can only imagine what it must have been like back in the day when it was brand new. Brand new, literally, at the time of Jesus and Mary Magdalene. And here we're going to walk into the entrance. We're going to take a look at the ceiling. We'll look at this in detail in just a moment. This gorgeous Dendera blue paint that they used is still so magnificent today. We're very fortunate that they have gone about cleaning this temple in the past 10 years, and we can see this imagery in a really, really beautiful way. And it's absolutely mind-blowing what we're going to be treated to here at Dendera. It's such a focal point, a crossroads in itself between ancient Egypt and modern Egypt at the time, where they're recovering much of the ancient teachings and encoding it into this newly built temple. So let's find our way on inside into the temple here. But before we go, look at this incredible photo that I took. This must have been 2009. And I get home and I look at this image and thinking, wow, what is this kind of rainbow colored dove or bird image that you see here? It's probably just some photo weirdness that happens with digital cameras, but it sure was a fun little artifact that appeared on this image. So entering into the temple precinct itself, we're greeted by the guards. They lead us on the way in. Often like to visit Dendera in the morning. It's very peaceful then, very quiet. And usually we try to arrive at the temple early so that we're the first group there and get to experience the temple on our own. Take our time walking through and enjoy the images as well as the quiet that you can experience at this incredible temple. Hathor is one of the most incredible figures in all of ancient Egypt in the pantheon of the gods and goddesses, the goddess of love and joy, also the goddess of sound. And recently the Metropolitan Museum of Art put up some very beautiful images of the sistrums, the musical instruments of Hathor, which is what we're seeing here. And in one of their comments, they said that the basic form of the sistrum capital also appears in numerous variations and combinations with other capital shapes on columns and square pillars. But what's interesting is they said that rows of such sistrum columns could also be understood as a kind of petrified sound barrier, gently playing music around the sanctuary of Hathor and magically conjuring the goddess's appearance. So isn't that interesting to think about these columns, these pillars, as petrified sound barriers? Some of you may be familiar with the work of Tom Kenyon, who's done a lot of work on the Hathors and channeling the sound of the Hathors. And it goes to this idea that this temple of love and joy is also an ancient temple of celestial music, music dedicated to the cow goddess Hathor, goddess of love and joy. And I really enjoy perusing the grounds of Dendera, seeing what's left of some of these beautiful faces of Hathor. Here at Dendera and also at Philae is where we see some of the best examples of the reliefs and images of Hathor. Only 100 years ago, the Temple of Hathor was completely buried in sand. And so it's really extraordinary, once again, to view this temple as we get to experience it today. This is a painting or a drawing rather, of the entranceway to Dendera, and you can see that the entrance is almost half buried in sand. The temple itself half buried in sand, and it's a far different experience to go into Dendera when it's completely or nearly buried in sand compared to what we experience today. Very important for us to note that Dendera was aligned with Sirius. Dendera was actually constructed so that the light of the helical rising of Sirius during the dog days of August would travel down the main corridor to place its red glow upon the altar in the inner sanctum of the temple. When that light reached the altar, the beam of light from Sirius was transformed into the star goddess Sirius. So think about that. I mean, creating a temple, aligning it with Sirius, with the belief or understanding that on special days during the summer, the light of Sirius would travel through the main altar, main sanctum of the temple, and on the altar, the light goddess or the light of the goddess star Sirius would emerge. That's really pretty extraordinary. I really enjoyed catching some of these ancient, or not ancient, but rather 100-year-old or so photos of Dendera as appeared to our ancient seekers. Very, very powerful. Dendera is the Greek name for the Egyptian Tanit Neter, which means she of the divine pillar. That name is a reference to the Tet pillar, the power pillar, which is thought of as the world tree or the cross. Now, it's fascinating that an alternate spelling for Dendera is Tentyra, the letters D and the letters T being interchangeable. Swapping a few vowels, as is also allowed, reveals a striking similarity between the words Tentyra and Tantra, which is the Sanskrit word to weave. Energy work that connects the human body with the divine power flowing through the universe. So that's a very good way to capsulize or to conceptualize Dendera. It is a place where people learn to weave the light energies of the universe. And we're looking here at a Tet pillar in the Cairo Museum that a photo of a Tet pillar I took in the Cairo Museum several years ago. And it's one of my favorite of all the artifacts in the Cairo Museum. We see the 4 layers of the Tet pillar with the head of Hathor, the face of Hathor, mounted up above. And here's the head of Hathor, the cow goddess, in detail. Various museums around the world, including the Louvre, have some really beautiful artifacts dedicated to Hathor. Some of them are really quite striking, like these two here from the Louvre. And you can see why people, even Tom Kenyon and others, start to talk about Dendera as a place where contact was made with extraterrestrial beings and indeed of the Hathors as extraterrestrial beings that we can still make contact with today. As I discussed yesterday, Hathor is the cow goddess, and she is connected with the Milky Way. The maternal waters of the heavens, the Milky Way, were comparable to a mother's milk, and thus comes the origins of the symbolism for Hathor, a celestial cow who is portrayed with stars on her body. And one object of the ancient Egyptian mystery schools was to connect with these divine energies of the Milky Way galaxy and to sip from the udders of the cow goddess or the Milky Way itself. This is a very good example of what I'm talking about. It comes from Deir el-Bahari, the Temple of Hatshepsut, the mortuary temple of Hatshepsut on the West Bank in Upper Egypt. And here we see Hatshepsut both leading the cow, Hathor, and also suckling from the cow. Now, this can be read on several levels, including that she is receiving sustenance from the Milky Way itself. And we know, of course, that Hatshepsut and Senenmut, her consort, were deeply involved in the alchemical studies and practices of the ancient Egyptians. In particular, the 19th dynasty of which she was a part was renowned for their alchemical knowledge. And so perhaps they had found a way to link with the Milky Way and to bring in some life-giving energies or vibrations from the Milky Way. This is another example of Hathor, or the Hathor cow, also from Deir el-Bahari. And we see that around the cow's neck, once again, is the symbol of Hathor, the cow goddess. And I showed you this yesterday from the Temple of Seti, from the tomb of Seti, where once again we see the cow goddess, Hathor, her body covered or filled with stars. Really very interesting imagery here. The sistrum instrument of Hathor is very interesting, and scholars like to speculate about the sound that it would make and also its ultimate purpose. The sound of the instrument seems to have been regarded as protective and symbolic of divine blessing, as well as the concept of rebirth. In addition to the symbolic significance of its sound, the shape and the decoration of the sistrum relate it to the divine. In his book, The Golden Ass, which he wrote about in Isis, Apuleius said that there was a rhythmic pattern that they would play with this instrument. It was 3 beats followed by a pause on a 4th. So once again, the museums around the world have beautiful examples of the sistrum of Hathor as this powerful instrument for invoking the divine. These images happen to be from the Chicago Oriental Museum in Chicago. At the Temple of Seti in Abydos, you'll see Hathor with the sistrum playing this instrument. So very interesting to think about what exactly its divine purpose was and the sound that it was capable of channeling. Here's another sistrum, Hathor on the face of a sistrum in the Oriental Museum in Chicago. They call it the rattle of Hathor. And it's fun to speculate that this rattle might actually have been carried by the Hathors as they emerged from the celestial realms onto the earth plane. That the rattle, in this case, the instrument, would be kind of like a warning that they're on their way, that they're coming. The Tibetans, when we see them with their resurrection stick, it also will have bells attached to it so that humans will know that these divine beings are coming and going from the celestial realms. Here's a beautiful mirror with a handle in the form of a Hathor emblem. This is in the Metropolitan Museum and goes to the just exquisite mastery that the ancient Egyptians had in working gold and creating these masterpieces of artwork that just endlessly fascinating. Another face of Hathor. One of the stories I've really enjoyed pursuing is that of Jackie Onassis, or Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis's connection with the Hathors and with ancient Egypt. It's known that she was a believer in reincarnation. We know this because of her conversations with Jonathan Cott, who wrote The Search for Om Seti, which is a great reincarnation story about a British woman who claimed she was a reincarnation of a British priestess at Abydos, or a reincarnation rather of a priestess of Isis, who incarnated in modern England and began to remember after a fall down her family stairs and a near-death experience that she had had this previous past life. The editor of Jonathan Cott's book was Jacqueline Onassis. And Jonathan Cott tells the story about how on his first meeting with Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis that she had pulled out a whole stack of newspaper clippings about Om Seti and was very familiar with her story on reincarnation. Well, I remember watching several years ago, maybe 10 years ago now, as a matter of fact, a documentary about the Kennedys and their involvement in the building of the High Aswan Dam in Egypt. The Kennedys were instrumental in assisting UNESCO in getting involved, and Jackie Kennedy in particular was so instrumental that the Egyptian government made a gift of a temple, the Temple of Dendera, similar name to Dendera, but a different temple. They gifted the smaller Temple of Dendera to the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City, and made it clear that this was actually a gift to Jacqueline Kennedy. Well, Jacqueline Kennedy at that time owned a penthouse that overlooked from Fifth Avenue the Metropolitan Museum of Art. They put a skylight over the temple in order for Jacqueline Kennedy Onassis to be able to see this temple from her penthouse apartment. And one of the Egyptian officials who escorted Jacqueline Kennedy through Egypt told the story that when she saw the Temple of Dendera, she said, "That's my temple." And again, the Egyptian people had it disassembled and shipped to New York and reassembled so that Jacqueline Kennedy could personally view this temple from her penthouse. Really extraordinary. But one of the most amazing things about this story is this flip hairdo that Jacqueline Kennedy was world renowned for. Many women copied this flip hairdo of hers, and it's just kind of interesting that it's itself a copy of the flip hairdo of the Hathors. And it leaves you wondering, who exactly was Jacqueline Kennedy? Was she, in fact, a reincarnation of a priestess of Isis, maybe from Dendera or Dender, or some of these other temples in Upper Egypt? It's very, very interesting to speculate on. Here is that actual Temple of Dendera that's now in the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York City. It's a beautiful condition, and it's an absolute gem to visit and to be able to walk around. The museums around the world, of course, are filled with Egyptian artifacts, and many of them are still live or living. It never ceases to surprise or amaze me that I can walk into a museum in Paris or London, or even when the exhibits travel, they come to Nashville, for example, and some of these artifacts really do speak to you. They open you up energetically. I literally had a heart chakra awakening during one of my first visits to Egypt. And ever since then, when I go into a museum, I can encounter, especially red granite artifacts, and my heart chakra will open sort of like dowsing rods. And what's happening is that my energy body, my light body, is speaking to or interacting with the temple, which still has the living energy within it of the ancient times. So really extraordinary experience, and I'm sure many of you have had similar experiences in temples around the world, or even in museums. Another excellent depiction of Hathor is found here at Deir el-Bahari, once again, the mortuary temple of Hatshepsut, where we see the head of Hathor set up on a pillar mounted to a box. Beautiful faces, absolutely mesmerizing to connect with these images and to come face to face with these statues and reliefs in person is really an extraordinary experience. It truly does awaken memories within. And you just think that these columns have been here for over 3,500 years. And you think of all the people that have come and gone and have been face to face with Hathor here at Deir el-Bahari or at Dendera and elsewhere. It's a really extraordinary thing to contemplate the longevity of the interest in these divine beings and the Hathors and the other Egyptian gods. And I think a lot of that has to do with just the stunning nature of the ancient Egyptian art. It's so beautiful and so energetic that it draws you in, and it prompts you to want to remember your connection with these beings, assuming you may have had a previous incarnation devoted to Hathor or Osiris or any of the other Egyptian gods. So I just wanted to spend a few minutes here with you looking at some of these various images that I've collected from these museums. The Louvre is what we're looking at here, Metropolitan Museum, British Museum. They're absolutely mesmerizing images, and you can see why people get the impression that the Hathors are alien beings by looking at some of these images. They do look beyond human to me, as well as others. Here's another good example. This was from the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston. It's a necklace with Hathor embedded within the necklace. It was used to keep heavy collars from sliding down. And it actually has the 3 images of the goddess Hathor. At the bottom, you see the cow, or rather in the center, we see the standing Hathor holding an Uaz scepter. Below is a roundel with Hathor as a cow. And up on top is the Menat with the head of Hathor wearing the vulture wig and the horned solar disk. This is a beautiful example from the British Museum of an actual linen garment from the Temple of Dendera. So this is from 300 BC, approximately, 300 to 150 BC. And to think that an article of clothing like this has been preserved after a couple of thousand years is really quite amazing. And once again, we see that it's a linen garment, and painted upon it is the cow of Hathor. Interestingly, Dendera was brand new at the time of Jesus and Mary Magdalene. And one definition of Dendera is the house of bread. Bethlehem, where Christ the light was born, also means house of bread. So to speculate that there's a connection there is pretty wild, and maybe too far out on the edge for some. But the fact is, they just have a tourist identification of the actual location of Christ's birth. But what if we're talking about Dendera as that place? Many believe that Mary Magdalene herself was a priestess of Hathor. And it's interesting that the Tyre element of Tentyra or Dendera means pillar or tower. That's exactly the meaning of Magdala, the root of Magdalene. Mary, meaning beloved, Magdalene, the tower, is the perfect title for a priestess of Hathor. And her function, Magdalene's function, was to raise the divine pillar or tower that connects heaven and earth. So there's a lot of crossover to be made here between the Hathors and Mary Magdalene. In the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, you can see from a relief from the 2nd century AD of a Hathor priestess with her horn disc, or rather her horns and her sun disc. And you can look at this and think, well, this could well be as close to a contemporary photograph of what we might imagine Mary Magdalene to have actually looked like as a priestess of Hathor. It's a very, very interesting relief in the Cairo Museum. So, entering into Dendera, one of the first things that people want to see is the famed zodiac. The circular zodiac on the ceiling at the Temple of Dendera shows 12 signs. The snake handler without the snake, and several other constellations. Remember, we talked about the serpent holder or the snake handler Ophiuchus yesterday. This beautiful zodiac was actually taken off the ceiling at Dendera by Napoleon's army and taken back to Paris. One of the first things that Napoleon did when he took power was to invade Egypt, and he brought with them hundreds of savants who, and here's the original in the Louvre. Napoleon brought hundreds of savants with them to Egypt and literally ransacked the temples, bringing much of what we see in the Louvre today back to Paris, and where it's certainly well preserved, but one could argue that it actually belongs back in Egypt. When this zodiac was introduced into the modern world, it caused an absolute sensation because scholars, upon first reading, believed that it actually talked about ancient times, going back as many as 10 to 15,000 years. And this caused a revolution in their thinking because that started to sound an awful lot like Atlantis. Later, it was determined that maybe it doesn't actually go back 10,000 years, but the seed was planted. And the French, of course, then became some of the leading researchers of ancient Egypt. Napoleon was followed by the great archaeologist Mariette, who made many important discoveries throughout Egypt. And the Louvre in Paris is one of the finest collections of ancient Egyptian artifacts that you can see anywhere. En route to Dendera, you see this incredible art installation. It's a modern depiction of Hathor, Hathor on her starboat, her ship of eternity, and also the zodiac is presented there as well. And it's just one of the great treats that you see when you're on your way to Dendera, as well as this incredible statue of a woman holding an alabaster jar. And there's a temptation there to think that that could, in fact, be Mary Magdalene that we're looking at in this statue. Beyond the Zodiac, one of the other main attractions at Dendera, of course, is the Crypt. And this has been the subject of a lot of investigation, a lot of controversy ever since Erich von Däniken published his book Chariots of the Gods and proposed that these light tubes that we see in the crypt here at Dendera are in fact light bulbs. Possibly. I mean, possibly. We don't know for sure. It's highly disputed that they're light bulbs. But something that really intrigues me about this that's often overlooked is that the crypt at Dendera is at a lower level of the temple. It's beneath the current level, or the level of the current temple. What this means is that the crypt was part of the former temple that was on the pad at Dendera. And in fact, there are rooms at Dendera where you can see the tops of the columns of the temple that existed there before the previous, or before the current temple. So it's another of those examples of in this case, the Ptolemaic kings building on the site of a former temple complex. And the crypt that we see here must have been part of that former temple. In fact, it's likely that this was part of a garden scene. The reason why we speculate on that is that you can see a water line here where this, what we call a crypt, was actually some kind of a container that was filled with water. And I'll see if I've got a detail here where you can see just beneath the tubes here, there are ducts that are lined up in a row. And those ducts are just on the top of the water line, suggesting that whoever sculpted this relief originally intended for you to see these ducks swimming on a water line. And then these tubes, these glass tubes, would be seen emerging from the water. Very fascinating. And here's a detail of one of these tube holders. There's something really striking about them that we're going to notice here in a moment that is also often overlooked by most investigators. Here we see that the tube is in fact a lotus bulb, or a lotus blossom, that is opening up. Gary Osborne has noted that the tubes are at that famous 23.5 degree angle, which is the axial tilt of the Earth, and leading to speculation that somehow this is encoding information about the tilt of the Earth. More details here of the light tubes. A lot of people overlook, too, that there are several examples of these light tubes at Dendera. On the main level of the temple, the Ptolemaic kings created these color images of the tubes, where we see the tube holders are in fact blue beings, and the tet pillar is also blue. They're very, very powerful images, and obviously the image was extremely important to the Ptolemaic kings, so important that they duplicated this imagery on the main level and in a third location. There's a small Isis chapel behind the Temple of Hathor, and we find a third example of these light tubes, or so-called light tubes, in the Isis chapel. One day when I was in the crypt, I looked more closely at these tube holders, and I noticed that they had double bodies. Can you see that there, where you especially look at the nose? You see that this figure has two noses. What is the meaning of that? And then you look at the arms, and you can see that they actually are portraying a double layer on the arms. As I was contemplating this imagery, it started to strike me that what if that is the way the ancient Egyptians are portraying the light body, or an aura coming off these plasma tube, or these tube holders. Part of what sparked my my line of speculation there is the recognition that these tubes are so closely matched to what we call Crookes tubes, or plasma tubes, that it started to suggest to me that the beings who are holding these tubes themselves might in fact be plasma beings, light beings. That's really a radical interpretation of this, and is far, far away from Erich von Däniken's take on them as light bulbs. Plasma was first identified in a Crookes tube by Sir William Crookes in 1879. He called it radiant matter. Basically, what he created was a glass bulb that gives off fluorescent light when a high voltage current is passed through it. The nature of the Crookes tube, cathode ray matter as it was called, was subsequently identified by British physicist Sir J.J. Thomson in 1897 and called plasma by Irving Langmuir in 1928. We've all seen a plasma ball and a plasma tube, and when you compare this with what we see in ancient Egypt, it's very powerfully suggests that in fact what we're looking at with these tubes are in fact not light bulbs, but plasma tubes, and that the beings that are holding them themselves may be plasma beings. The first body, our physical body, is 60 to 70% water. Then we have this etheric double or ethereal body, described as a fog-like substance 1 to 2 inches around the body. It lives in a higher energy universe, and normally it's invisible to the naked eye, but Robert Monroe, the famed out-of-body investigator from the Monroe Institute, argues that to be visible, it must either reflect or radiate light. So look at our tube holder here and ask yourself, is it possible that this is showing his radiant etheric body, his ethereal double body, or his plasma body, and that in fact this figure is actually holding a plasma tube? Again, this interpretation is speculative, but it certainly does raise the stakes in what we're actually dealing with here at Dendera. Plasma life forms have bioplasma bodies. They are electromagnetic bodies which generate electromagnetic fields and radiate electromagnetic waves similar to the aurora borealis, which is also plasma. If we carry this thought forward and go back and look at Osiris and some of the other images of the Egyptian gods and compare them with plasma displays of the aurora borealis, it starts to give us this possibility of interpreting Amun, who's shown with blue skin, a yellow kilt, and a red top crown, as in fact a plasma being. Again, highly speculative, but worth considering that what we're actually dealing with here are more advanced plasma beings than what we've previously considered in our studies of ancient Egypt. And of course, the radiant light body, known as the rainbow body in Tibet, could also be a plasma body as well. And yesterday we made the connection, or drew the correspondence between Osiris and his resurrected body and the rainbow light body, suggesting that in fact the ancient Egyptians were practicing a form of the radiant or rainbow light body teaching. They just didn't call it that. They were describing them in terms of the Egyptian concepts of resurrection rather than the Tibetan. However, we can plainly see that the artwork of the Tibetans and the ancient Egyptians is closely corresponds to one another, supporting this contention that the plasma beings that we might be seeing on the wall there at Dendera are in fact light body beings, and that this is in fact the state of matter that Jesus then ascended into after the resurrection and ascension. The resurrection scene in the Osiris chapel at Dendera portrays Osiris rising from the dead. And now, based on what we've just seen, we ask, is he actually rising as a solar being or a plasma being? And of course, we know our sun is actually plasma as well. So very interesting correspondences to be made here. Just interesting food for thought that the ancient Egyptians may have had knowledge of plasma. And when they're talking about rising from the dead, they're talking about rising into a plasma state of being. Now, let's move on to the pronaos. This is the entranceway of the Temple of Hathor at Dendera, where we see these incredibly stunning columns with the heads of Hathor on the top of them and depictions of various gods and goddesses, most notably Isis and Hathor, etched onto the walls in this very, very beautiful and stunning color that we see only at Dendera, and that is referred to as Dendera blue. We're very fortunate to be able to, as I said earlier, visit Dendera in its present state of refurbishment. In this photo, we see the same ceiling On the left, we see it as it first appeared, or as it appeared when I first went to Egypt in 2003, completely covered with soot. Very difficult to make out what is portrayed on the ceiling. On the right, we see the ceiling cleaned and refurbished and restored. Magnificent is the difference. Absolutely stunning. And again, we're so fortunate to be able to look at these images of Hathor in their beautiful restored state, taking us back to how the temple was seen only 2,000 years ago. Probably for the past 2,000 years, if you entered into the Temple of Hathor, you certainly would not have seen this amazing and pristine blue color like we see today. It probably would have been covered with soot. So how fortunate are we to be able to see these incredible images throughout the pronaos or entranceway of the Temple of Hathor, and they're as close to their original color as we could get. Noting here, many of the images are hacked away. A lot of this damage was done by the early Christians, who understood that as long as this artwork was in pristine condition, it still offered a connection with the divine realms. But by hacking away faces or hacking off arms or hands, they knew that they were able to sever the magical connection between the temple and the celestial realms. So just going to share with you here for a moment some of my photos of what you would see on the ceiling at Dendera or on the temple walls. In this instance here, we're looking at Ptah. And then we look at the ceiling, which is absolutely one of the greatest masterpieces in all human history. I mean, we talk about the Sistine Chapel and Michelangelo's work as being a masterpiece. Nothing really compares to what you see on the ceiling of Dendera. And about the only way to really appreciate it is to crawl on your back, just lay on your back and stare up at this ceiling and see this famed astronomical scene of the gods ascending into the heavenly realms. It's on this ceiling where we see Thoth here, the great initiator, but we also see the gods on their ships of eternity, the arcs of the millions of years, which we'll come to in just a moment. We see the gods sailing on the Milky Way as ascended beings on their ships of eternity. We also see all the zodiacal symbols as well. But in particular, it's these arcs of the millions of years or ships of eternity that have captured my imagination. And time again, when I go to Dendera, it's to try to understand more deeply exactly what the Egyptians meant by this symbolism of the gods sailing for eternity on their ships. Often you'll see multiple gods on these ships sailing together on the Milky Way. And in the lower part of the photo there, you can see a row of stars, which actually symbolizes the Milky Way. You won't see imagery like this anywhere else in Egypt. You certainly won't see it anywhere else in the world. And it makes a visit to Dendera that much more special. This image here of the Ptolemaic king on his feathered throne, this key of life, his resurrection stick wearing his crown on his arc of the millions of years. We talked about it in our earlier segment. And to me, it's one of the most enticing images in all of Egypt, as are these two as well, where we see Isis and Hathor riding upon the arc of the millions of years. Absolutely beautiful. And the thing is that these images are actually invitations. They're invitations for us to apprehend, comprehend this symbolism, and actually go through the process of transformation that will enable us to receive the ascension teachings from Thoth, for example, and to climb aboard the ships of eternity and sail as an ascended being for eternity throughout the cosmos. Now, let's come to the Star Walkers. We talked briefly about these yesterday. These are also images on the pronaos, of the ceiling at the Temple of Hathor at Dendera. And again, we see the exact same symbolism of the ship of eternity matching precisely the way modern science portrays a wormhole. I happen to think that the wormhole symbol is the primordial symbol. From out of this symbol falls all other important symbols. And with it comes a question, which came first? When you look at this image of the wormhole boat, where did the Egyptians get this idea? In other words, did the Egyptians concoct this idea of their ship of eternity looking this way? Or are they copying something that had been shown to them? Is this wormhole shape the primordial shape of the ship of eternity that exists in all worlds? So in other words, if we're in a temple, maybe in the Pleiades or Orion or Sirius, are they showing imagery similar to this, where figures are sailing upon a ship of eternity that is shaped exactly the same way? I tend to think that that's the case, that the Egyptian ship of eternity is an earthly copy of the heavenly original. Egyptologists say that this boat, the ship of eternity, is merely the sun. And I'm accepting of this partial interpretation so long as it's accompanied by the ancient conception of the sun not only as the light of the world, but also as a star tunnel or stargate through which we travel to the heavenly realms. Further, the river Nile this sunboat sails upon is the heavenly Nile, the Milky Way, the river of stars of the divine lady, Isis or Hathor. So here we are confronted with the ancient Egyptian belief that our sun is a tunnel and that there's in fact a link that connects our Earth to this sun tunnel or star tunnel. Interestingly, in 2008, NASA found exactly such a portal connecting Earth and sun. Like giant cosmic chutes between the Earth and sun, magnetic portals open up every 8 minutes or so, NASA has discovered, to connect our planet with its host star. And once the portals open, loads of high energy particles, plasma particles, can travel the 93 million miles through the conduit during its brief opening, space scientists say. So there literally are these connecting links between Earth and our sun. And then the idea is that our sun itself, now we are speculating, is actually contains at its core a wormhole. In 2011, a new study put forth by Russian scientists should suggest that wormholes might exist between distant stars, including our own. And instead of being empty tunnels, these stargates or wormholes would contain a perfect fluid that flows back and forth between the two stars, even giving them a detectable signature. So now we have to ask, have scientists somehow wormed their way into discovering a transport system for souls and the secret of the oil of the perfected ones? And can we ride these portals? Well, the answer is that according to what we see at Dendera and elsewhere, we can. And that this is in fact the method of travel of the ancient Egyptian gods. In this example here, we see Ptah, the god of technology, standing in his portal or shrine, holding his resurrection stick and mounted upon the ship of eternity. And it gives us more food for thought here of Ptah as this cosmic traveler, a technologist bringing various technologies, including the technology of ascension and also wormholes, to Earth. Here is Sekhmet surfing the star also at the temple at Esna. So this is what we're ultimately dealing with when we're in Egypt, is this idea that Egypt is the gift of the gods, and that these temples encode the ultimate secrets of eternity of these gods who came to Earth long ago in order to show us how to attain our ultimate ascension. What we're looking at here is one of the key symbols of ascension, the Om symbol, as we know it, which is also the Egyptian gold loop of eternity, which is what we see here in the bottom of these three symbols. The classic iconic imagery of Asia has always shown Om radiating from the star Sirius. These images of Shiva show the Om symbol in the star Sirius. So isn't it interesting that what they're trying to say is that Sirius is the origin of Isis and the light that comes into Dendera, and it is also the origin of the Om vibration. The science of cymatics has shown that the Sri Yantra diagram is produced by the sound of Om, but what is the origin of the Om symbol itself? Well, the answer, according to the Hindus, and possibly even the Egyptians, is taking us back to Sirius. Looking at the correspondence here between the Om symbol and the Sri Yantra diagram, we see that although the Om symbol is drawn in many different ways, the correct form and proportions of the Om symbol are determined by the visual outline that appears in the Sri Yantra diagram. Locating the Om symbol in the Sri Yantra is as simple as entering the dots on the corners of the triangles that approximate the form of Om and then connecting the dots. The form and proportions of the Om symbol that appears in the Sri Yantra are an exact match for the visual outline and proportions of Sirius A and B at their once every 50 years conjunction. Isn't that interesting? The form and proportions of the Om symbol appearing in the Sri Yantra are also the form and proportions of the outline of the Mandelbrot set. The Mandelbrot set is the ultimate primordial sort of symbol of the light body, as we will see. In his documentary, Arthur C. Clarke tells us, in his documentary Fractals, The Color of Infinity, he shows us that the outline of the Mandelbrot set is the same as the Om symbol, and it's the same as the outline of the sitting Buddha. Isn't that fascinating? So we seem to be dealing with another cosmic symbol here, perhaps beamed to us from Sirius, that links the sitting Buddha, the Mandelbrot set, and the Om symbol. So here we see the Om symbol over the sitting Buddha. Taking this one step forward, scientists altered, or mathematicians rather, altered the Mandelbrot set and came up with what they call the Buddha-brot. And the Buddha-brot is a mathematical equation that reveals a light body form that is almost identical, in my opinion, to the Tibetan rainbow light body form. So is it possible that what we see here at Dendera is this primordial science of sound opening the way to the creation or the activation of the light body? That's an introductory remark that I want to put on the table here. And right now we're gonna take a short break.